So the Church of England Synod received some distressing news this week. Attendance at its churches is set to fall for the next 30 years, with today's figure of 18 people per 1,000 regularly going to church dropping to just 10 per 1,000 by 2046. Today, an 81-year-old is 8 times more likely to attend church than an 18-year-old. Well, a new book, Battling the Gods, published here in Cambridge this week, challenges the assumption that humanity is naturally disposed to believe in gods, describes how atheism existed in the most ancient of classical societies long before Christianity did. Fascinating. And is atheism the rational choice is the question we're asking. We're going to speak to the author of that book. Tim is here in just a second. But let me start off with Dr. Elaine Storkey, theologian and philosopher. Lovely to have you here this morning.
Thank you.
Virgin births, people coming back from the tomb, corpses jumping out of graves, talking donkeys, Peter 2:16, flying horses. How can that be a rational choice?
It depends on what you mean by rational choice. I mean, the whole idea that atheism is a rational choice, which is, of course, the topic of this discussion, my answer is, no, it's not a rational choice. You've turned it round, you've asked our talking donkeys a rational choice, which I hadn't actually come to debate.
Well, no, I mean, I think it's fair to turn it round, because we're talking about which is the rational choice, and if you're saying religion is the rational choice, people who might question that might, you know, talking donkeys might be on the list.
Yeah. Well, we're not talking about that, though. We're talking about is atheism a rational choice. So let's stop with the topic that we all came to actually debate. And so you can be, in my view...
No, I'm sorry. So, you know, which is the rational choice, which is the irrational choice? But is an absolutely fair area.
No, the which is the wrong question too, as though there are only two options here, atheism or talking donkeys. And that's really what I'm rejecting completely.
Okay,
because it's banal.
Before we fall out completely, we'll have a cup of tea later. I'll buy you lunch. But let me put this then. Isn't the reason I mentioned talking donkeys and all those things that some atheists find all atheists find absolutely mind-blowing. Before I mention that,
talking donkeys.
Yeah, before I mention that, indeed so. But that's a prima facie thing that people see about it, and then they move on to perhaps a more sophisticated theology, and that's absolutely understandable and fair enough. But doesn't faith transcend reason? And that's not an irreligious thing to say. That's just what should happen. You should go beyond reason. Faith is greater than reason. That's the argument, isn't it?
No, because you misunderstand the nature of reason. I mean, let's take this word reason. Words get their meaning from the system of which they're a part. And so we can construct meanings of reason that are actually buy into certain systems, have certain presuppositions loaded into them. You can have reason that starts from the assumption that there is no God. And once you've actually taken that as your reasonable point, so that reason is about gaining knowledge from our five sense experiences or understanding about the explanation of those, what we gain from those experiences. And it's a very, very narrow view of reason. It shrinks our understanding of reason. And by the time you've gone down that path, yes, you haven't got room for God.
Excuse me, Elaine.
No, I'm not excusing you yet, because I haven't finished yet.
Listen, I'm telling you, she's in good form this morning, Alan.
If it's all right,
I would, be careful how you go on this.
You have miscalculated.
I'll tell you what.
Reason is not about starting out with the belief that there's no God. And
I haven't finished
The reason is you don't believe something if there isn't any evidence for it.
No, we haven't got there yet. The evidence is based on the assumptions that you're already putting in to the program. And when we're making a program on a computer, you're actually already programming things in, and you know at the end of that you're going to get information out of it. And the word reason is the same. There isn't one universal, neutral, objective view of reason that the entire human race and everything in the world agrees with. People would have different views of reason. So where would I go for my understanding of whether atheism is rational or Christianity is rational?
Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence?
Well, I mean, for example, do I take some leading scientists, Ard Louis, Professor of Physics at Oxford University, Tom McLeish, Professor at Durham University, and Francis Collins, Head of the Genome Project, all of whom say Christianity is where we are. We've actually put our fingers to the bone. And are we rational? Are those people rational?
Ollie's dying to come in. Well, you see, people it's a grab bag of go on.
Absolutely.
Tim, in a minute.
I mean,
You're a former vicar.
agree with Elaine that we are, but we're starting in the wrong place. But it seems to me that reason isn't why people make religious choices. You become part of a religion through growing up, through all sorts of things, and it's actually quite difficult, as I know from my own experience, to walk away from that.
You're an atheist.
I'm an
but you were
atheist
a
who
Church
has
of
been a
England vicar.
clergyman.
Why don't you stay a Church of England vicar? A lot of them are atheists. Why don't you?
Because I couldn't do it. Because life might have been more comfortable if I had, but I couldn't do it.
Okay. Tim, okay, via ex-vicars and talking donkeys and Elaine's superb exposition of different types of reason, let's talk about these ancient atheists. This is fascinating. This is before Elaine, before Einstein, before Darwin, before Galileo, I think he was mentioned earlier on, before Jesus. You know, where did these ancient atheists get the intellectual weaponry for this?
Well, I think that the intellectual weaponry has always been there. I think that atheism is actually just as normal a feature of human life as religious belief. I mean, we're asking whether atheism is the rational choice. I'd say it's certainly the intellectually critical choice, and this is where I'd agree entirely with what Arif just said. Atheism isn't actually a belief about the world. Atheism is a methodology. It's an intellectual methodology that says that we don't start from a position of dogma, we start from evidence, and to the best of our abilities, and of course the human brain is fallible, to the best of our abilities we go from evidence to conclusion, and we're led by that evidence. And I might respectfully say that the discussion we had earlier about the Catholic Church's own investigation into child abuse might have been bettered if they'd followed that sort of methodology. So I would say it's intellectually critical, but I like Elaine, I'm rather suspicious of the word rational, which seems to plug us very quickly into a story about human progress away from sort of primitive societies that don't get things, you know, via the Enlightenment and so forth, to the Western modernity.
So what about those early atheists? What were their views on first cause? I mean, I know it was a time of thunderbolt and rainbow. God did that and God did that. But what about first cause, if we're talking about a more sophisticated theology and desire to understand the world? Or were they not too bound up in notions of creation?
They weren't too bound up in notions of creation. I mean, if you think about where fault lines form between the religious and the atheistic, they do change over time, and creation is one of these things that's, you know, very big in the 20th and 21st century, but perhaps, I mean, I'm no expert in the history of these debates, but it certainly wasn't a fault line for classical antiquity. But having said that, they were very keen to find alternative explanations for celestial phenomena. There were the question of
thunderbolts and rainbows.
Thunder, yeah, exactly, because thunder is the weapon of Zeus. Yeah. So the idea that you can actually explain it through material causes and so forth was a key weapon in the in trying to unpick conventional ideas of theism.
Yeah. Arif, do you think that belief is explainable in terms of natural selection and evolution? If we reach a certain cognitive level, then you can explain the thunderbolts, you can explain the rainbows, and you can see significance in things.
That's right. I mean, there are theories concerning how religious beliefs came to exist in the first place, and I think that religious belief may well have some natural basis. For instance, and this is a theory that goes back at least to David Hume, which is that people do have a natural tendency, and indeed there's an evolutionary advantage in having a natural tendency to be over-credulous about there being some kind of agency behind the phenomena that you observe. So, for instance, you know, the marginal benefits of being slightly too credulous that the thing you see moving is a snake rather than, you know, a stone or something, are clear. And
what's the advantage?
Well, the advantage is that you run away more often than you need to. But running away more often than you need to is much safer than running away less
Survival
often.
thing, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
but surely as well it's being able to be the guy who can explain stuff. See that thunder?
Well, sure. I mean, that comes later.
Then you have more successful breeding.
That's right. No,
I don't know whether we can actually sort of chronologically chop it up and say this comes then, this comes then. I think humanity's always been a big bag of Haribo, assorted sweets, you know, and many different types in there.
Yeah, listen, she had me for talking donkeys. I'm going to have a go at you for a big bag of Haribos.
The one point to which I think we agree is that there is, whatever the explanation is for religious belief, certainly the explanation isn't in terms of the evidence for it. There is just no evidence at all that the universe was made by man with magic powers, or that somebody came back from the dead, let alone the talking donkeys or the talking snakes or any of the other stuff that they try and palm off on us. And
Well,
we've
it's
known this
symbolic.
for centuries.
That's
We've known
symbolic.
this for centuries.
If God is outside space and time, you're dragging God into the wrong place. You know,
Yeah, it's funny, they only
people-
started saying it was symbolic when the evidence became really clear that it was literally false.
Yeah.
Before that, they didn't.
Yeah.
But
You missed church this morning, didn't you?
We've been through that before.
Peter, the default position. Oh, that's the wrong one. The natural disposition is... Sarah's dying to get in. But let me come to Peter
Peter's
on this.
great. Come on.
So, well, it actually doesn't problematise my belief in Christianity at all to think that atheism is in fact a default position, or one of the default positions. After all, we believe that man is fallen and that he was separated from his creator, so that would totally come in line with our beliefs. But I find it interesting that the professor went for
be
a
an
rather
atheist is to be
expansive
fallen.
idea of atheism. I mean, atheism is simply the disbelief in God. That's all it is.
Yeah.
It's nothing more than that. And there are very different forms of atheism. You can't simply say, that atheism is one particular thing. Some atheists are atheists because they're empiricists. They believe that the only things that are true are those you can empirically verify.
Yeah.
Some because they're naturalist materialists. In fact, most because they're naturalist materialists. They believe that the only causes are natural, that the only thing that exists is material. The reason I don't think that atheism is a rational choice is because I think there's far too much good evidence for the existence of God and exactly Catholic Christianity
Can we
to
have that?
believe
Yes.
that atheism is true. And for that reason, I would say that it's irrational. For one thing, I think we have the evidence of the resurrection, which I think is excellent.
So where's
Not only do I think we have excellent evidence historically, not only that, but we also have metaphysical proofs of the existence of God, such as the Aristotelian argument from change. All of these different arguments are very, very good evidence for the existence of God.
There are
And
many
atheism simply doesn't
Tim,
work.
first of all.
Sorry,
in-
these
in-
arguments
Tim,
have been-
first of all.
Sorry.
Well, just on evidence, I mean, this idea of people rising from the dead, I mean, that's a common feature of a number of different ancient stories, and it's a way of explaining. I mean, there's a guy called Apollonius of Tyana whose story is told in a very similar way of sort of coming back from the dead afterwards. It's how you express the idea of the holy man in a certain genre of ancient writing.
Well, it's not that. It's actually
evident.
not that, because the evidence that we have for Christ rising is based on Greco-Roman biography, and the fact that his
based-
followers go forth afterwards and then they die for this belief. That's simply not the same as simply animistic
There are
beliefs
arguments
about
on both sides.
explaining
There are
all
also
sorts of other phenomena. Simply not the same thing.
Contemporary
Sorry.
chroniclers like Philo of Alexandria, who chronicled everything, didn't mention it, but there are other people who do mention it.
Yeah.
Do you know what? We've had that debate before. We're going to have it again. And you, Sarah, think
Okay.
that belief is logical and it's rational. But which belief, Sarah? Is Scientology? There's a religious belief. Is that rational?
It's not really religious.
Well, it is recognised as religion in some parts of the... OK,
You have to
Hare
use-
Krishna, is that rational?
You have to use your reason to
You have to
work
answer the
out
question.
what. Well, first of all, I'd just like to start with why would that I think atheism is irrational.
Is Mormonism rational?
Mormonism, that's a very big subject. I think it's irrational.
You said no, it's
Shall
not
we
rational.
just start
so it's
with
just
belief
your religion
in
that's rational.
God?
I think you can demonstrate there are some religions that have much better reasons than other religions.
Sarah,
don't
I
think there's
do
any good reason for
apologise.
one.
It's over to you now.
Can I just begin with something that faith and reason, John Paul II said, are the two wings on which the human spirit soars to contemplate the truth. So I think you need faith and you need reason. So why is faith reasonable?
I'm
Well,
sorry,
I want to hear more from Sarah.
Because it answers to the longings of the human heart. I think it's irrational to feel that a room full of people and an earth full of people who long for justice, who long for truth, who long for beauty, and who long for eternal life should be living in a universe that answers to none of those desires and requirements.
Can I have an
What a
argument?
cynical thing to believe that all the things we desire are nothing, and they end nowhere, and time is there, and then we fall into an abyss of meaninglessness. That is irrational and cynical.
But what about the-
But you also need, apart from that longing and desire and the beauty of the lives of the saints, I'm not here talking about the source of Mormonism, because you need
Why do we
reason
need
to look
religion?
at the evidence.
Why do we need it?
Because
The
it's
human
there.
heart cries out for
Because it's
peace
there,
and for
Sarah.
love
Because it's
and for
true.
meaning, because it's true, but because we cry out for a communion beyond our earthly
Atheists
existence.
love each
Wanting
other.
something doesn't make it true.
What?
Wanting something doesn't make it
And I agree with you, sir. I agree with you, sir. But that's why you need reason
no.
to
I
understand.
can't, wait a minute. Let's go to Arif.
Yes, no, I'm grateful
Arif,
for this long word salad,
bless
which
you.
is helpful because it gives an idea of the sorts of confusions that lie behind what you call or seem to think are arguments. I've only
Let's
heard
hear
one.
your
No,
reasons
I mean, you did
for
talk
not
for about
believing in
you did
God,
talk
'cause
for
I'd
about
love to
3
know.
minutes, ma'am, and I haven't heard a single argument. I did hear one argument from Peter earlier on, which is to do with scriptural evidence for the resurrection. And you alluded to other ones that have been exploded for hundreds of years. But in the case of scriptural evidence, everyone knows, it's quite clear that people make mistakes all the time, scriptures are wrong all the time, testimonies are wrong all the time. You yourself believe that testimonies in Islam, in Mormonism, in Scientology, in David Koresh, these are all wrong.
Oh, please.
So these things are
Elaine's not having this.
So these mistakes, you have plenty of reason to think.
I'm going to privilege Elaine
that
here.
the evidence for the resurrection is of a similar type. That is, it's mistaken.
Elaine.
Arif, you're a good academic. I respect your stuff in a whole range of ways. What you're talking now is rubbish. And that's largely because, have you never heard of hermeneutics? You actually can't simply say scriptures are wrong. The Bible is a library. It's not just a book.
Excuse me, let me just explain the argument.
It's a library full of many different kinds of literature. Some of it's song, some of it's prophecy, some of it's biography, some of it's letters, some of it's dream analysis, some of it's fiction, deliberately fiction. The Gospels are full of fictional stories about, we call them parables. And it's loads of different forms of literature.
Talking Donkey's a parable.
When you come into those forms of literature, you actually read them appropriate to the form of literature.
Elaine,
you don't try and get the books of law out of the Psalms, otherwise you're wrecking the Psalms.
That's all very interesting. What I want is an argument that these things are true.
Arif, a thunderbolt's going to knock you down in just 1 minute.
Bring it on.
Elaine,
My point...
Elaine, Death, was this not... We're coming to the end. We're coming to the end. So
we should have started much earlier.
Well, we were talking about other things. Let me ask you this, because isn't it logical that in the dawn of our species, the cradle of our species, 100,000 years ago, people only lived for 20 years, 25 years. So adulthood was short. People died with massive infant mortality rate, and religion was a way of dealing with our growing brains, with our cognitive abilities, dealing with death and loss. Well, I wasn't expecting that. Quick answer, Elaine.
Well, what's the question? You haven't asked me a question.
Wasn't that the reason for the development of religious belief?
No, not at all. It was not. You've given no evidence. You've just developed a hypothesis. The reason for people's religious beliefs...
It's a better hypothesis than the man with magic powers did. Is that a better hypothesis? Is that really what you're saying?
Any chance of me finishing my sentence? The reason for religious belief is that deep down in our heart we have this yearning. And I think that every human being would consent to having a great deep yearning.
We have to leave it there. You know what? She's right. We should have started earlier. Thank you for watching.